the amazing Marilyn Bradford. Welcome, Marilyn. How are you today?
I'm just awesome, and thank you all for doing this and having me. It's just great.
Thank you. This is a really fun event.
It is. It is a very fun event. And I'm particularly excited about your book, Marilyn.
Thank you.
It's a book that I avoided for a long time.
You're not alone, Diva, just I want to say that.
And I say that in the best of ways because Marilyn basically wrote this incredible book, Right Recovery for You. And I thought, well, I'm not an addict, so I'll of course read it, but it wasn't the top of my list. And so it was probably about 2 years into doing Access before I actually read it. And when I did, it changed so much more than I thought it would ever have changed. So I would just like to speak to that in case anybody watching, either now or in the future, is thinking, well, recovery, what's that got to do with me? Mm-hmm. You're about to find out.
Well, thank you for that, Diva.
That's great. So, Marilyn, what prompted you to write Right Recovery for You? How did this book come to life?
I had been diagnosed as an alcoholic and a depressive, and then I went into treatment and I did the traditional thing and therapy and 12-step and all of that. And then I found Access. And I wasn't looking for a different way to do things. I mean, I knew that traditional treatment and 12-step program was lacking in a lot of ways, but I didn't know what else to do. And I started using these access tools, just the general access tools, with my psychotherapy clients, and they were getting better faster. And I was like, wow, okay, let's see. So I approached Gary Douglas and I said, hey, Gary, these tools are amazing with psychotherapy and addiction. And I'm getting all these new ideas and new ways of looking at everything. Could we do something with access and addiction? And that's when he said, yep. And there was one right class at the time, which was Right Body for You. And I said, can we just call it Right Recovery for You? And he said, sure, I think I'll do a lot of right classes. So anyway, that's how that got started.
Oh, that's so great. So, Marilyn, what is the number one thing that people are addicted to?
Judgment and the wrongness of self. And that underlies, I call that the primary addiction. And everything else, alcohol, drugs, and I'm going to expand on that, the secondary addictions. And I want to do a little over here at the moment, which is that please let go any ideas you have from this reality of what addiction is, because this reality is, well, it's alcohol and drugs or maybe gambling, but you know, you're not one of those people. Addiction is really an energy looking for a target, and it's a space or a place we choose when we're in a lot of pain of self, when we have a sense of being wrong, not fitting in, not knowing how to handle things, help. So we vacate ourselves in order to have some kind of place where we can, okay, I can go here. But it can be to things like trauma drama. It can be to image. It can be to being healthy. You can be addicted to almost anything. It's really about the energy of where you go to disappear and to feel safe. So that's something that I'd really like people to know about addiction. It is not just alcohol and drugs. And it is not about, all right, you have to stop this and do this program for the rest of your life and you're powerless and no, absolutely not. Many, many, many people have told me they've gotten let go. And I'm not going to say gotten clean and sober because that's not what it's about. They've let go of that need to disappear from themselves and are much more now in the space of empowerment and finding out who they really are and what they would like to choose. And that to me is the whole, it just makes me so happy. It's the whole essence of Right Recovery.
Yeah. And I think you've touched on something so great too, which is you mentioned this in the book too, which is looking at the lies. And one of the biggest lies is that addiction only happens to, I think you said, like a small, dirty underground population, which is just not true.
Yes.
And, that's a thread that we've been talking about a lot today in the different interviews about recognizing what's true, recognizing what's a lie, and not getting stuck in that lie.
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the difficulties of going with this reality, or even someone, and that's what this reality preaches, and preaches in the 12th step. Now you're sober, now you know all of this, and all.
Mm.
But what that does is that if you believe that, it deprives people of having the awareness of the kinds of addictions they may be engaging in. And image is such a huge one. Being addicted to this reality, to being right, to getting it right.
Yeah.
And the thing is, any kind of addictive behavior, any leaving yourself, you can't really create your life or find out what you know to be true for you. So for me, true recovery is really about coming back to you, creating your life. It's not about stopping anything unless it's actually harming you or your body. But just that willingness to be aware and not judge. Oh, I'm doing that again.
Mm.
Okay. I wonder what else I could choose. I wonder what else is possible here. Let me use some tools here. So it's cool.
So
What are
cool.
some of the tools that because you say like, let me use some tools here, and I know that you continue to use all of these tools of access consciousness every day. And like you said, you were an addict, and you've used these tools so much to change your life. What are some of the kind of key things that people could, I guess, almost start with right now?
Well, the first thing I ask clients, and if I'm doing a class, is what's right about your addiction you're not getting? And people are like,
Wow.
what?
They must
Yeah.
be like, lady,
Yeah.
you need to go to the loony bin.
Exactly. And I had someone come in, this was years and years ago, when early on in Access, and she said, well, I'm an alcoholic. And then my next question is always, well, how do you know? And she was like, not taking that for, a question. This is all about question.
Mm.
It's like, well, I'm drinking 2 bottles of wine out in the evening. I'm like, okay, well, if we don't go to definition, what's going on in your life? She said, well, we have these 2 foster kids and they're out of control and we may have to give them back. And my relationship with my husband is failing and he just lost his job. And it was like 8 things. And I'm like, with all of that in place and without any other tools, how could you possibly stop drinking 2 bottles of wine a day? What if that's just a coping skill you have at the moment because you don't know how to deal with your kids? Nobody's helped you or facilitated you or given you tools to deal with your kid or your failing marriage or financial things. And you could almost feel her just go, oh.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's where we started. So that's a great tool to start with. What's this? I said, this is helping you cope. Why not?
So how did you, with the tools of right recovery, where did you go next with that, Late? How did that come together?
Well, we started looking at, first of all, I'm technically a clinical social worker. So I know all about resources, and I was, doing a little bit of that. This was in my private practice, and setting her up with some various things. And then we started looking at, what would you really like in your life? What's true for you? And that's a question that I always have people ask, and they often don't know. I'm like, I get it. I had no idea. I remember being in school going, would someone please tell me what to believe about all these political conflicts and things? I don't have a clue. So we start working with that. And they're like, I don't even know where to start. I'm like, okay, start small. And that's the thing. We think we need these great big solutions. No. Okay, you're at a restaurant. what would you really like to eat? And ask, get in touch with your body a little bit. That's another thing. Please remind me if I don't get back to that. But would you like to go for a walk today? Yeah, I don't know, maybe. We look at the light and heavy tool. What do you know is true for you about whatever it is? And we go with where their life is at the moment. It's not the same for everybody. But I started working with her on what was going to work with her and bringing in the whole idea of awareness versus answer. And that's been huge for people who are beginning to look at addictive and compulsive behavior and mental stuff and all of that, because this reality is all about answer. And
Yeah.
God, Marilyn, I just love this approach. Like to go in to a clinical social worker and to say, I'm an alcoholic. I swear to you, you're not going to tell me any different. I drink so much wine, you wouldn't believe it. And my life is a mess.
yes,
And then for that clinical social worker to say, are you sure? And then to go, what if you could choose your life? Like, what are some little things that you could do to start getting you in touch with what you like and how you would like your life to be? I mean, that is so mind-blowingly kind, empowering, different, like bizarre to anybody in normal
Yeah.
world. It is
bizarre.
such a gift. It just is hitting me in a way even more than usual. That is so cool.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
It really is. It's so unique. And will you tell us more about, awareness versus answer? Because I think, that's looking at what you were just saying now too. It is so wildly different because this is now going into your own awareness rather than the answer, which is what most recovery programs do, not for, good or bad or whatever, but it's just what they have available as a tool. So having awareness is a different possibility. What does that look like? How do you access that?
Well, I have a lot of client stories, so I'll tell another client story. I had someone who came in and said, I'm an alcoholic and I've been sober for, it was 3 or 4 months. I can't remember. But I want to work on some other issues. And I'm like, oh, sure, fine. So we started looking at stuff. And then she said, this was in Texas. She said, I'm meeting a bunch of friends for Mexican food. And I always have a margarita with Mexican food. And I don't know what to do. I said, I'll tell you what. And we worked on this a little bit. I said, why don't you order a margarita and drink it with awareness? She said, well, what does that mean? I said, well, get your margarita and just be with it a moment and put it up and smell it, see what it's like. Just be present with it. Have a little sip, roll it around, notice what happens with your body. And we went through all of this. She came back the next week. She said, you know what? I don't even like margaritas. But that had been an answer that she had. She said, I didn't even finish it. I just got some iced tea. But that's the kind of thing you're just doing that to their universes.
Yeah.
Because it's all conclusionary realities otherwise.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting because it seems that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going from this automatic pilot of I am now heading into the addiction. I can feel it coming. I don't have any control. Here it is. I'm in it. That's it until I'm out the other side of it. And then, but it's something that controls you.
Yes, exactly. It's putting all of the control outside of yourself rather than, and I'm not saying that someone who's been drinking heavily can necessarily stop cold turkey.
Sure.
That's not what I'm saying. But you can begin to question everything. What are you buying is true and real that's not true about what you're doing? And what other tools could you use? And one of the other tools that I use a lot is, who does this belong to? And I had a client once who came in and said, I'm an alcoholic and blah, blah, blah. And we were working about 6 weeks and nothing was changing. And I'm like, that doesn't happen if you come in and see me and you really want to, make progress. And finally I said to her, whose alcoholism is it anyway? She said, oh, it's my mother's. And she never had another problem with drinking. At least what she
Wow.
told me a few months later. So, and another thing is people can take up an addictive behavior or a mental illness so that the rest of the family doesn't have to look at what they're doing. It's a kind of a self-sacrifice thing. I'll be the bad one. And they can be victims and say how horrible it is to have me and, all those kinds of things. So it's there's a lot more
Wow.
going on than often meets the eye. That's what I would say on that.
Holy moly. It's like I feel like we've opened up a gigantic universe, which is just, yeah, fascinating. So thank you.
God, what an interesting way. I mean, it's rehab or rehabilitation. It's like this is like true habilitation of your being.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, well, what do you like? What is actually going on? Or what do you love
Yeah.
that you have been tucking away and making untrue for yourself? Or just these true questions to empower somebody.
Yes. And another thing I want to, so people are like, well, how do you get into this place? And a lot of this, or I would say pretty much all of it, starts early on with a diminishment of being, either consciously or unconsciously, from your parents. A lot of parents think they're doing the best thing. You're a Tanya, or you're a Waduchi, and this is how we live. You're a Maxwell. This is what we believe. This is what you do as a woman, as a man. You're given the straight and narrow of how to behave, and no one is going, hi, what's true for you? Hi, being. It's fine to be the different that you are. Can you imagine? So this great sense of wrongness begins to develop. And even if it's not said verbally, this great sense of not knowing how to cope with things, how to fit in. And that's when we tend to go to addictive behavior. My first addiction was sugar. I just could not get enough sugar as a child. It was the only thing that I found that would feel nourishing to me in my body. Just because of the way my family was. And I'm not making them wrong or right. They just were that way.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was a professor. I grew up in a really intellectual community where you basically didn't exist below the body. So body wasn't included. And here's the thing, people, you cannot really reclaim and create your being if you're not connected to your body.
Right.
And that's why I love the access tools, all the body work, bars, everything like that.
Yeah. Hey, Marilyn, can you talk a little bit more about addiction to sugar? I think it's an interesting topic. Like how does addiction to sugar work? But like as a humanoid, we have, this desire, like sugar works for us, but where does that kind of go into addiction for sugar? That's something that I'm actually interested in of my own question.
I don't know if I'm willing to let go of this addiction to sugar. I'm kidding.
I'm Diva. I'm not gonna let go of it.
Well, let me give you some concepts. Use, abuse, and addiction. And we'll go with sugar.
Okay.
Use of sugar, it's nice to have it in your coffee, or, I think I'll have a piece of cake, but it is not something that you obsess about or think about a lot or use in a different way. So that's use of anything, whether it's having a glass of wine, that's use of alcohol, or going for a run, rather than being obsessed with, my pecs, my health and all of that. That's use of, it's a behavior, it's a product, it's, something. Abuse is when you're aware that you really should be dealing with something, but you just don't want to do it right then. Like, oh, I had a horrible day at the office, or my kid got expelled from school, or I'm having a lot of fights with my partner. I think I'm just going to eat a gallon of ice cream. But you're aware what you're doing. That I'm just going to use this right now as comfort. All right, and then I'll, get it together and I'll deal with what's going on. But that's abuse of a substance. And
Okay.
it's not wrong. It's just something to be aware of. That's
Mm.
not what the substance was intended for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was great. That's
Yeah.
great.
And then addiction is you have a sense or feel that you have no choice.
Mm.
You get yelled at by your boss, you lose $1,000 on investment, and you have to go eat a whole pie or go to the grocery store and buy 18 cupcakes. That's addiction. And this applies to all of these substances or behaviors.
Mm.
I did a show once on addiction to image, and one of the things I said is there's nothing wrong with using an image if you're aware that, okay, I'm going to go see the principal. I'm going to look, sophisticated and pleasant, and, I'm going to do that, or a job interview, wonder what they require. Okay, I can do that image, because that's going to create more for me. I'm not going to show up looking like a slob, but you don't identify with it. You don't have to have it.
Mm.
You just can pick it up when it's useful to you. And that's totally the same with sugar. And as humanoids, I go with that. We require more sugar at times. And if we buy into this reality that sugar is bad for you, then what happens? Then you have to judge yourself. Then you have to go, oh, I'm doing it wrong. What if it's not bad for you? What if you're like, okay, if I have this, whatever it is for you, this chocolate cupcake, this, I'm into jelly beans these days, a bunch of jelly beans. Now, body, you okay with this? What's this going to create?
Yeah.
Wow,
Well, it's interesting.
I was just going to say that is helpful moving forward. Use, abuse, addiction. Love it. Love it, love it, love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned in the book too, Marilyn, to stop identifying with the addiction. So many people have been taught that a way to kind of acknowledge what's going on and not hide from it or hide it from others is to say, my name's Diva, I'm a sugar addict, and I'm making light of it, but saying like I am, rather than what you suggest is to say, well, I'm engaging in this behavior right now, so that it's not necessarily part of your identity, it's something that you're choosing to do. Can you talk a little bit more about how you got that awareness and how people can work with that?
Well, I was in AA for, I don't know, 15, 16 years. And I actually did the program, particularly in the beginning, did the whole thing. But I became aware that people were limiting themselves greatly. I'm Reggie, I'm an alcoholic. Is that all there is to you? And for a lot of people, that's what it became.
Right.
It became the center of their life, the identifying factor. And I'm like, wow. And I began to see what a limitation that was. And so I always tell people, never say, I'm an overeater. Say, currently, I'm eating more than my body would really like, and I'm beginning to use tools, and I'm beginning to change it. And I have different choices now. Because you are never a behavior. And it goes back to that thing, like if Johnny hits Sally, you don't say, Johnny, you're a bad boy for hitting Sally. You say, Johnny, hitting is not okay. That behavior is not okay. We need to have a little talk with Sally here, and let's just say you're sorry or find out. But you don't ever identify a person with a behavior. That is so demeaning to the being. And we all engage in crummy things at times, Ooh, that was not very nice of me. Oh, well. I'm a bad person. I just need to look at that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That is awesome.
With with this whole conversation, I think something that is really interesting is the sense that you have choice.
Yes.
In a world and a topic where you supposedly don't have choice, because again, you are controlled by this thing that's outside of you that kind of takes over. Can you talk a bit about that and the journey of actually getting from an addiction of any kind to recognizing and trusting that you actually do have choice, even if it doesn't feel that you have choice,
Right.
even if you can't feel it within yourself. Like, what is that? Like, how do people get to that?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I would say that with the creation of addiction, or as children, so many of us felt powerless.
Mm.
We could not find a way to adjust, to be like, to stand in the lemming line and march forward to the sea. You know, we were just like, hey, you, I don't know what to do. Um, and that leads to a sense of less than.
Mm.
And that leads to a sense of powerlessness. And I'm going back to when I first, I'm not even sure why I'm telling this story, but we'll see. It's what came up. Um, I was married at the time. We'd gone down to San Antonio, which is a Texas town, to go to the museum, have brunch, go to the museums. Well, we drank so much at brunch that we really couldn't go to the museum. So we made it back to our house, and I I went to the grocery store. It was a Sunday, and at that point you could buy wine, but you couldn't buy anything stronger. And I took the label off the stronger thing and came back and started drinking and drank that whole thing. And I woke up in the morning, I'm like, this is not working for me. So I had a sense of being powerless over alcohol. But what I didn't know was that I didn't have the tools to change it. The best, and I remember my therapist telling me, and I started seeing him that next week or something. He said, Marilyn, I'm going to recommend that you go to AA. It is not a great fit for you, but it's the only thing I know.
Right.
And that's how I ended up getting into AA. And I'm like, well, I'll work the program and whatever. And one of the things that it does provide is the sense of camaraderie. I'm not alone. There are other people who have this. And then we all join together, and we are all powerless. But that never sat well with me. I mean, I could admit it at the time. I'm powerless over alcohol, but I'm like, I wonder what it would take to change that. And I had the sense of being so small and not. On the other hand, I'm like, wait a minute. I've done these kind of cool things in my life. So it was almost like the split being, but I'm told I'm small. I'm told I'm powerless, but over here, I wrote this paper, and the professor was like, oh my God, that's friggin' brilliant. I've never seen that in the book. And I think most humanoids have that. We feel like we're so wrong and bad, but there's all this other outside stuff that's like, this is fabulous. You're brilliant, so it's this very conflictual kind of thing. And once I got to Access, that's really what assisted me in changing. I was like, oh my goodness, who does this belong to? What's right about me I'm not getting. I can change my money situation. And my sense is, and I imagine this is true for you all too, I'm just not a linear person. And what I got in Access was this different, expansive, global kind of energy. And I've been trying to do bam, 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 which of course I failed that often because I'm not a bam, 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 bam person. So it was the tools of Access. It was at that time, Access, it was about 17 years ago, was fairly small. But I did go to the first body class. I'm like, I have a body. Wow, this is sort of interesting.
Wow.
And bars, and wait a minute. And then things started to change. And sometimes that's the thing, when things start to change on the outside, then they're changing on, you don't really, it's not linear. So you have these, like, I'm acting differently in this situation. That's interesting. I'm not taking it personally. I'm not falling apart. I'm not going to so much resistance and reaction. Wow, I think I'll have more of that. So that's really, I can't, it wasn't linear, and it was created through, for me, using the Access tools and choosing, and that's it. Because that's what, Gary would say at that time. I mean, now Dane, of course, is, but Dane wasn't involved in that way at the time. somebody come up and he'd say, well, choose, damn it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I have choice. And the other thing I want to say about choice is sometimes you require another person to introduce that you have choice, or that, and whether it's in a more general way or in a more specific way. I was at just last week at the SOP in Vienna, which was amazing. And Dane facilitated me on something that was not easy for me. And after that, I said, thank you so much. That really, and I said, and but there's a sadness about, and he said, well, what if you did or chose this? And I was like, I'll have that. And it was just him letting me know this was available.
Yeah.
And that's what we do for each other. This does not need to be an individual journey. That's one of the things I love about Access is consciousness. Show me some facilitator I could work with right now, or ask a question, or someone comes up to you and says, could you give me 5 minutes? Yeah, sure. We really can contribute to one another in a way that's so different from anything that goes on in this reality. Really so different, because it's not constricted. It's not in a little box. And who wants to be in a box? No, thank you.
Yeah. And it's so different to what addiction makes you feel like you are completely alone.
Yes.
And so now opening it up to this is a whole different world of support, I guess.
Yes.
And of also knowing that people, but also the universe and you have your own back.
Yes, exactly. That's a really good point, Diva. To know that you have your back, that there are people in your life that has your back, that consciousness has your back, that Access has your back. What a difference. How many of us grew up with this idea that nobody had our back? My mother certainly didn't. She threw me under the bus a number of times. Oh, well, I don't have to make that significant anymore. And that's another thing. Not having to make our past significant. Wow.
Yeah.
Go forward with that.
So wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Marilyn. And for anybody watching, please know you can find Right Recovery for You online in the Access Consciousness shop. So check it out. It's really, really worth a read, just like all the books on this series.
And I just want to mention too, Marilyn, you also facilitate classes on Right Recovery for You, and there are also Right Recovery for You facilitators, and you lead that facilitator training and that area of Access. And can you just say a little bit about the classes that are offered, just so people kind of know what else is out there if they want to dive deeper?
Well, one of the things I want to say is that a lot of the classes that are offered are things, and I have a class coming up called Recovering from Family that Access is putting on, which I'm really excited about. And there are things like that where the facilitators are now some shorter classes, and now after a while they qualify to do one-day classes. But there are things like having peace with your body and making yourself a priority, and all of those kinds of things that actually contribute to you coming back to you and creating you. So it's not like how to stop drinking. And you can go on MarilynBradford.com too, because a lot of it's listed there. But and I do the facilitator training, and I do a 2.5 day. I did a lot traveling before the pandemic, and I'm open to traveling again. So I'm looking at doing some other classes. But thank you for that. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, it's just a great option for people who, just want to learn more and start to get clarity. I mean, like, just this idea of use, abuse, addiction is just one piece of just the thousands of topics that you talk about in these classes. So it's a really great resource.
Thank you all so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on, Marilyn. We love chatting with you.
It was great.